time my great pleasure to introduce Sir Martin Landray to deliver a keynote. I think it's important to note that this keynote is sponsored by our platinum sponsors of Bayer, IMC and Roche. And just to give you a little bit of background to Martin. Martin is a Professor of Medicine and Epidemiology in the Nuffield Department of Population Health at the University of Oxford. He's Deputy Director of the Big Data Institute. He's over 20 years of experience of leading large randomized trials for cardiovascular and kidney disease. And since March 2020, I think you'll all across the globe be aware that he's co-led the recovery trial, enrolling over 47,000 with COVID-19 and publishing definitive results already for 10 treatments that have changed practice worldwide. He also leads the Big Clinical Trials Collaborative that's developing and promoting the implementation of better guidelines and regulations for randomized trials. And he's Chief Executive of PROTAS, a non-for-profit company focusing on the design and delivery of highly efficient randomized trials for treatment of major public health conditions. And he was also lead contributor to the G7 Clinical Trials Charter and 100 Days Mission for Pandemic Preparedness. And in June 2021, he was knighted for services to public health and science. So absolutely delighted and looking forward to hearing this presentation. Over to you.
Thanks very much. I hope I stimulated a few more questions in the previous session. If this is a wedding, I guess you haven't had the first drink yet. So it's a real pleasure to be here. I thought what I would do is give you a little flavour of what it was like on the inside of running a recovery trial, but also what the lessons are for the future. So to start with and state the obvious, we really need reliable evidence from clinical trials. I've been using this slide for about 20 years, but I think it's important to keep reminding ourselves that medicine practiced in the absence of reliable evidence from good clinical trials is bad medicine. And therefore, anything that we do that distracts from delivering good results on good trials, and that's all of us, and all of the many others that are not in the room, is bad for patients, it's bad for public health, it's bad for the economy, and it's bad for trust. And clinical trials are in a crisis. They are eye-wateringly expensive. So for a typical cardiovascular outcome trial of a new drug, 5 years ago, the cost to companies was in the order of $1 billion. I have no idea but shudder to think about what the costs have been of the recent dementia trials. That's obscene amounts of money, it's unsustainable even for the biggest companies, and it drives down the opportunities for innovation because it's a major barrier that sits between the bright idea of a new drug which could solve a major problem like dementia and actually getting it to patients. So cost matters. Second thing, many trials are doomed to failure through bad design from the off. They are designed to fail. Janet Woodcock, Deputy Commissioner in the FDA, did this report of nearly 3,000 trials registered for COVID and found that only 1 in 20 was designed in such a way that it could possibly provide a useful and reliable answer. It doesn't mean they did it, because of course many never actually happened, or failed to complete or enroll or publish. And that's shocking. Somebody designed those trials. Somebody funded those trials. Somebody approved those trials to go ahead. And some poor patients took part in those trials. That's bad practice. It's bad for trust. It's bad for health. Third thing, the operational cost and complexity is out of control. So the contract research organisation industry has grown exponentially over the last 20 years. These are old figures, but it was in the order of, again, US dollars, 30 billion in 2015 and rising by 10% per year. Great business if you're in it, not a great business necessarily if you're interested in health or drug development. And finally, this is all a major threat, as I've said, to the quality of care and to public 15% of the international guidelines related to cardiovascular disease are based on sound evidence from good clinical trials. 85% is based on something else. Cardiovascular disease sits probably at the top of the evidence-based medicine tree. And industry has shifted away from common diseases to rare diseases. There's been some transformative new approaches in some of those rare diseases. Say cystic fibrosis as an example. That's important, but not at the expense and the distraction of actually dealing with the problems that actually affect most people, most of the time, and which overwhelm our hospitals and society. That's the context of where we are, and those are some of the problems we have to address. And in early 2020, we published this paper on essentially the magic of randomization. Essentially what it said was what would happen if randomization was invented today. The news would be full of A/B testing and the magic of a coin toss and so on and so forth, as opposed to the miracles apparently of ChatGPT. So imagine that randomization is invented today in today's world, with today's societal values, with today's networks, with today's data systems, with today's technology. We wouldn't be trying to do the same old thing over and over again and tweaking at the edges. We would think fundamentally differently, and that's what we have to do. You don't have to read the paper, it's quite straightforward. I've summarised it for you. I'd like it if you clicked on it and then at least the count goes up. Smart design and delivery, integrating with routine healthcare and data systems with everybody's everyday life, if you like. Proportionate trial regulations and guidance, and that's what will drive better care. So that's the introduction. What about recovery itself? Well, I'll take you back to the 28th of February 2020, when the outbreak had moved from China to Iran and was just beginning to appear in Italy, and the rest of the world was beginning to wake up that there might actually be a bit of a problem. I wrote to Sir Jeremy Farrar, who was at that time director of the Wellcome Trust in the UK, and said, why is anybody thinking about randomisation? And I set out in that email, it's exactly when resource is limited, health consequences important, and therapeutic benefit uncertain, that randomisation provides an ethical and scientifically robust solution. So one, we need randomisation to help solve the pandemic. Two, it's during times of system stress that regulatory and governance bodies are most prepared to innovate. In other words, this is an opportunity that it doesn't have to be the same old. Let's demonstrate that, and you'll see we did demonstrate that, and our challenge right now is how do we systematise something that was seen as exceptional, but really is actually pretty blooming obvious. Jeremy and I found ourselves on the same bus about 2 weeks later, on the 9th of March 2020. This is still 2 weeks before the UK entered into lockdown. The serious papers on the left were dealing with the horrendous scenes and stories that were coming out of northern Italy at the time. The popular papers in the middle were dealing with the crisis in the UK about running out of lavatory roll. Is there enough toilet paper to go round? Was the headline story as Italy was facing that sort of stage of the pandemic. And Jeremy and I, on that crowded bus journey, decided that the tsunami was coming. It was probably about 3 weeks before London was in the same situation as big cities in northern Italy. And therefore we had 2 weeks to get a trial up and running. And so Peter Horby and I, who's an expert in infectious disease, but not a clinical trialist, certainly not in the UK, took on that task. So how do you design a trial for something you've never seen before? You go back to first principles. And so actually I had 2 papers on my desk as I wrote the protocol in 2 days on the 9th and 10th of March 2020. The first was this from the 1980s. You'll recognise the name of the first author, because he's here in Marston now. Why do we need some large simple randomised trials? It's almost exclusively based on cardiovascular disease. And if you close your eyes and for myocardial infarction read coronavirus, and for cardiovascular death essentially read COVID, everything else slots into place. The principles are the same. Principles stand the test of time. Detailed operational practices do not. Let's focus on the principles. The second document I had was the protocol from the Second International Study of Infarct Survival, or ISIS-2 as it was known. This was a famous trial in cardiology, one-page case report form, focused on clear outcomes, a factorial design. Let's call that a platform trial if you like, because there's two coin tosses. And this really important paragraph on the front page of the protocol. Didn't have any pages, by the way. By far the most important determinant of the success of the trial is the extent to which, in those busy hospitals, the responsible physicians and nurses choose to enter their patients. And hence, the extra work must be, and is, absolutely minimal. When you're facing a pandemic and the scale of crisis that is about to hit the NHS and hit many places around the world, actually, that keeping the excessive work absolutely minimal is crucial. Anybody can design a trial that nobody can do. The trick is to design a trial that anybody can do and everybody can do. So we copied that, we modernised it a little bit, so simple eligibility, important outcome of mortality, a coin toss, in fact, as you see in many people, evolved that over time, one-page consent form, one-page case report form, and a simple randomisation. And because this is a modern era, we were also able to take some advantage of some of the NHS data. Sometimes that's used as an excuse, we don't have NHS data. No, but we've made this trial work in Nepal and in many other countries, even in the absence of the data. We evolved over time into what's essentially a factorial design. So this is 4 coin tosses in the latest iteration. These evolutions built on confidence and addressing the questions of the time, all down to basic principles. The trial took place in every single acute hospital in the country. Many of those hospitals were what we would call district general hospitals, or county hospitals, community hospitals essentially. Certainly not big academic, there were academic medical centres that took part, but actually the biggest recruitment tended not to be in those. And many of those hospitals had never done trials before, and many of those investigators had never done trials before. So, as an example, there's a town up in the northeast of the country called Hartlepool, which has never done any trials before. They randomised 850 patients. Why? How? 1, it was easy to do. 2, they saw it as important. 3, they found it incredibly rewarding and motivating because actually they were helping to find a solution. We randomised 12,000 patients in the first. We built from protocol to first patient in 9 days. We went to 12,000 patients in less than 100 days. We got the first 3 answers in those 100 days. Our fastest recruitment rate was 1,000 patients in 30 hours in January 2021, and overall we're now at 47,000 in the UK and another 1,000 or so elsewhere. So, is the data, is there one badge that says NHS and therefore there's one data set? No. It's as complicated and as horrible as data systems are in any health system all around the world, including from what I've learned here in Canada. You can consider Scotland and England as being provinces or states. They have actually slightly different laws and slightly different governance processes. You can't, there isn't a single database. You use what's there, you can be incredibly powerful. We got 4 answers. Not just of effective sort of repurposed treatments like dexamethasone, which we got on the 16th of June of that year, but of more complicated repurposing, tocilizumab, which is an arthritis drug. That's now been approved on the back of these results in 35 regions, including the United States, EU, and Japan. Baricitinib, another rheumatology drug, and then an entirely new drug, the monoclonal antibodies produced by Regeneron. So this isn't just an approach that only works if you're repurposing things you're very familiar with. It's an approach that works for the very newest drugs that have no license. In fact, actually they weren't even invented or discovered at the point that we started the trial. Just as importantly was to identify the failures. Each of these drugs was widely recommended, loudly very loudly promoted, extensively used. People presented all sorts of observational experiences, from Mount Sinai. Half the patients happens to get hydroxychloroquine and half of them happens not to. We'll compare them. That's nonsense. It tells you nothing except that you missed the opportunity, the magic of randomisation. You could have given just as many people the treatment and learn something, as opposed to blundering along and continuing a myth. And it's a myth that damages, that distracts resources, and damages trust. And what about people who say, well, this is all very well for a pandemic, but you can't compromise on safety or quality. We need all these other processes because we're focused on quality. I've heard ethics committees say that, I've heard regulators say that, I've heard industry say that, I've heard academia say that. Let's not point the finger at anybody. It's everybody. Well, what's the FDA's view? Here are the three most senior people in the FDA. Writing in JAMA last October, entirely on the recovery trial, and making the point in their concluding paragraph, streamlining and quality are not opposed. It's easy to make things more complex, doesn't make them better. And so the lessons are that arbitrary use of these treatments is damaging, that randomized trials are actually a component of clinical care. It's not some extra that somebody else should do. They are part of the day job for our hospitals, for our clinicians, and for the service as a whole. Compelling results change practice. The dexamethasone results, achieved in 100 days, within 3 hours of announcement, it was NHS policy up and down the country. And within 3 weeks, it was international policy all around the world. And that one result is estimated to have saved 1 million lives. How much more complexity can you really justify? The regulatory and the policy-making decisions, it's so much easier when the data is straight. When you know the answer, because the answer is clear, because the result's clear, and that comes from scale and good design, then making these sorts of decisions is not something you need big committees to do. You can make them very rapidly. But they have to be designed to be actionable and feasible. So, I'm just conscious of time. You okay? So I just wanted to sort of move on just in the last few minutes into, and then the so what and how do we systematize. So the G7, which was chaired, the presidency rotates around the members of the G7, and in 2021 it was the UK's turn, and the UK, quite understandably, focused very much on pandemic preparedness. The chief scientist in the UK, Sir Patrick Vallance, who was previously head of R&D at GSK, and before that a academic clinical pharmacologist, chaired this report on the 100 Days Mission. And this theme has been taken up by many since, which is essentially within the 100 days of declaring the next public health emergency, the next pandemic, we should have drugs, vaccines and diagnostics ready for large-scale evaluation, or those that we already have actually already evaluated. And of course we achieved 100 days in a sense in recovery. My role was as co-author of the section, one of 3 sections on clinical trials and data. And this recommendation, or this statement, which was later, the whole document was signed off by the leaders of the G7, not the health ministers, the leaders of the G7, made this point about regulation. We need to refocus our regulatory guidelines on the fundamental scientific and ethical principles that actually underpin trials, and whilst embracing flexibility and innovation. GCP should be revised to focus on what matters for generation of actionable information rather than what's easy to check, placing emphasis on principles and purpose rather than on process and documentation. We're not after excessive filing practice. What we're after is clear results that will impact the care of future patients and involving the patients along that journey. Trials are something you do with and for patients, not to patients. Patients don't need protecting from trials. Patients need to be part of trials, and they need protecting from bad medicine that is uninformed by the absence of good evidence in trials. The World Health Organization has taken that up. The World Health Assembly last May, there was a resolution passed, which essentially said what we need to do is adopt both the regulatory improvements and some of the system improvements proposed by the G7. Didn't put it in quite those terms, but that's essentially what it turned out to be. And I and others have been leading a project for the last 3 years now. In fact, it's the reason I was on that bus with Jeremy Farrar heading towards the Wellcome Trust back in March 2020, to actually really rethink what are the principles that underpin good randomised trials. What does good guidance look like? And the aim here is to provide guidance that is based on the scientific and ethical principles, that is inclusively co-developed, so not just by a few regulators and a few bits of industry getting in a room in a sort of in a cosy little club and a clique, coming up with something and then issuing it to the world for consultation, which they can then decide to accept or ignore, but actually getting people from all backgrounds, of all sectors, including regulators in industry, and patients and professional groups and expert trialists and so on and so forth, from all around the world, in a room to actually co-develop the guidance. It was an interesting experience, but really worthwhile. And about 100 people helped with that process, and then there was a public consultation in 6 of the world's commonest languages on the back of that, to come up with a set of principles that will actually guide, and that will guide because they're principles, they will guide the future as opposed to regulate the past. Anybody can come up with rules that actually are basically designed to rule out the mistakes of the past. But the world is changing, technology is changing, partnerships are changing, the relationship between the health system, industry, academia, and patients and the public is changing, and so too are the diseases changing. We need new principle-based guidelines that will actually guide us through what does good look like in a changing, uncertain, and unpredictable world. Not about writing down this piece of paper needs to be signed by this person and filed in this location. The current rules are by and large based on the principle that carbon copy and fax machine is state-of-the-art technology. That's nonsense, but so too would be writing a set of rules that were based on today's type of technology, because that won't be around forever either. So I commend you to have a look at those. They're in, to coin a phrase, plain English. A lot of people have looked at them. I was at the EMA last week, speaking to the chief executive and some of the senior figures there. I spoke to FDA, I spoke to WHO, to many in industry, and also many patient organisations, including in lower-income parts of the world and some really quite resource-poor settings. And people have all found these to be accessible guidance that focuses on principles and that they actually can use and follow. It doesn't tell you how to do something, because I don't know how you need to solve your problem, but I can guide you to the principles that you need to keep in mind. So I'm going to finish with how should we fix this evidence generation crisis, which is how Rob Taylor, the FDA Commissioner, would put it. And what I thought I'd do was just to simply summarise a response that we put in to a White House Office of Science and Technology policy request for information earlier this year. Essentially, like many, they're looking at their past performance over the pandemic, looking over the water to the UK and saying, why didn't we do recovery and how can we fix that? First things first, recovery, not every trial should look like recovery, otherwise you haven't applied thought on the principles. But secondly, I think there is a real opportunity to systematise the exceptional, if you like, make the exceptional routine is what we do. So I think that this comes under a number of headings. The first is to prioritise good trial design. If 95% of the trials are doomed from the outset, then we've got a problem. So we have to fix the design crisis. Design is not a statistical thing alone, or a trial methodology thing alone, or a clinical thing, or a regulatory thing, or a patient thing. It's all of those and much more. Design is about getting the answer and doing so in an efficient way. That's where I think those principles really help. They foster innovation and they provide the flexibility that we need. We also need to establish fit-for-purpose infrastructure. So there are a number of pretty obvious barriers, and we should call the lie to them. Where people say they are protecting actually they are very often obstructive. Where people say they are seeking accountability, credit, and sort of oversight, all of these things are good values, but exactly how are they doing them and at what cost? And would there be smarter ways of achieving the same objectives? We also need in systems and infrastructure, people, skills, and processes are very much part of that infrastructure. It's not just build another tech platform, that will be important. But many people approach this clinical trials as a problem that tech can solve, whether it's ChatGPT, cloud computing, whatever else it might be. There's a lot that tech can offer us, but this is a people problem first and foremost. We also need to stimulate the learning, the good habits through useful practice. Let's not wait for the next pandemic, which might be next year, but it might not be till next century. It will sure be different to the one we've just experienced, so let's not just fight the next war on the basis of the experience of the last war. Let's actually develop the systems and get them running, doing day-to-day things, useful things in the meantime. Maybe that's addressing, bacterial pneumonia. Maybe that's addressing something that's nothing to do with infections and outbreaks. Maybe it's hypertension in the community. Maybe it's mental health, maybe it's dementia. There are many areas. But let's get those systems up and running and get people into the habit of doing good things. That builds the relationships, including the relationships around our glorious wedding just now. It builds the relationships, it builds the trust, so that when you need to pivot because there's a crisis, you can do so because everybody understands their role and understands and trusts the roles of others. And finally, let's think of this not in an academic term, in purely academic terms. Let's think about this much more broadly. Let's think about this in more economic and finance terms. Let's think about what public-private finance models, partnerships, actually could really stimulate activity. So for example, government investment in a platform, and I've said a platform isn't just tech. Industry investment in a specific trial, or industry donation of a specific drug and placebo. Or grants, challenges, and targeted calls. Those are the sorts of things which help to actually get both the systems working and also spark the interactions, the creativity. And I do think that the biotechnology sector is one that is really right for this sort of approach. So I'll finish there. Thank you very much. Happy to take as many questions as there were after the last speaker.
That absolutely sparks lots of questions in my mind. We've got about 5 minutes for questions. We've got mics in the room. If you could just introduce yourself when you ask a question, and we'll try and get as many in as possible. So we'll start with this mic on the right.
Yes, Montreal. Thank you very much in this very difficult time, being so bright and so efficient. My question is about efficiency in randomized clinical trial. There are many aspects. But one aspect that you touched in the second part of your presentation, it's about bureaucracy, and that has to do with the contract between institutions, it has to do with the RAB. And I know that we're at the point where we have to address all of that. It's going to take some time. And I'd like to know how did you do that? It's quite exceptional. Any advice that you would give us in the time that we're trying to change that, anything that we could do now?
Yeah, so first of all, it was exceptional time. There was only one item on any agenda. Every page of the newspaper, including the sports pages, the arts pages, there was only one headline, and it was all coronavirus and COVID. So getting attention wasn't hard. And it was the one and only priority for everybody. So that's a very different set of circumstances. Having said that, there are some infrastructure advantages we did have. First and foremost, I would say was the ethics system. In the UK, for 20 to 30 years, we have had a system where you go, a nationally coordinated system, where you go to one ethics committee, you get approval from that one ethics committee, and it covers the entire country, the whole of the UK, all 4 nations. Bear in mind that the legal system in Scotland is different to the legal system in England, but the one ethics approval covers the entire country. The one regulatory approval, same as here, covers the entire country. So I can get approval in timed and reported metrics. I can get approval, even for a normal protocol, in 30 to 60 days from those 2 organisations that allows me to give an unproven drug or a proven drug, a licensed drug, either way, to patients and deals with all the ethical and consent and whatever else issues there. We've had that for 20 or 30 years. I've watched the US struggle to create it, but they are now with a series of essentially privately run multi-center ethics committees. Industry is going to the places where it's easy. And like the UK, Canada sits in a place of, it's a small country sitting on the doorstep of a big market. We can't compete on the size either of our population or particularly the size of our market. What we can do is on the speed at which you can actually get a trial up and running. So those things are the positives. The negative, which we managed to overcome because basically the government said to every NHS hospital, you've got to sign this. But standard contracting is still a particular issue. And again, I don't actually understand why at least there couldn't be some sort of reciprocity. In other words, that you want one set of lawyers from the health system to look at the contract, say yes, and negotiate that contract if it needs negotiating, then it's still a standard, that's not always possible. And then once they've done that, everybody else says, well, I need to hire more lawyers to go through it yet again, because the differences between places are small by comparison with the big issues and similarities. And industry has an option, and its option is not to come here. So when lawyers think about protecting the risk that they are creating if they make things slow and difficult is a risk of banishing resources, income and prosperity. And that I think is something that is essentially a government message. And I would urge, this is a fabulous group of people, but we have to be pitching at government and institutional levels because those are the places where the real advantages are seen and where the real influence can